Welcome to the Savvy Podcasting for Entrepreneurs podcast, a place for podcasters to learn what's actually working in the world of podcasting and how to use their podcast to generate consistent leads in their business. I'm your host, Jenny, and I'm so excited you're here. Hey, Savvies, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. We skipped releasing a new episode last week as my son was homesick all week long and I hadn't recorded a new episode for the week. So I decided to just skip releasing so I didn't have to stress about when I would be able to record. Because if you have kids, you can't really do anything unless they're sleeping when they're mobile as one of those weeks. So skipping a week isn't something I advise anyone to do. And it definitely isn't something I do very often, but sometimes life just throws you curveballs and it is what it is. And that just goes to show you how important batching your episodes is. As you know, I'm a huge proponent of batching and should have followed my own advice here. So anyway, that's not what this episode's about. This episode is for those of you who have yet to launch your podcast or are starting your podcast soon and or planning on revamping your cover art. And I feel like cover art isn't something talked about too often, but it's definitely a key piece of your podcast. So today I'm going to be sharing 5 elements that your cover art should have. So number 1 is coming in with an easy one. It should be the correct size. So you will not get approved by Apple Podcast if your artwork isn't the proper size, which is 3,000 by 3,000 pixels. So make sure that's the correct size from the get-go so you don't run into any issues when it comes to the submission process, because that is a little small hang-up that can totally be avoided. Number 2, make sure that your podcast name is in the top portion of the graphic and it's easy to read. So you want to make sure it's in a legible font because you don't want people to be like, what does that say? I can't read it. And you want to make sure it's big enough to read on a mobile device, as this is where most people will be listening to your podcast. So legible and easy to read in terms of like size. So yeah, you also want to have your name on it somewhere. So this really helps with brand recognition. So having with your name, so mine says with Jenny Sunnison, yours can say with whatever. Somewhere on the graphic really helps people know right off the bat who is the host of the podcast. It's just great for name recognition. But yeah, I think that is really important to have. So I just wanted to quickly interrupt this episode to tell you about my podcast launch checklist. So if you're in the thick of the podcast launch process and you aren't sure if you're missing any key steps that you need to do, make sure to grab the free checklist. You can get it by going to savvypodcastingforentrepreneurs.com/checklist today and grab it. And let's get back into the episode. So you also want to keep it simple. So trying to add too many different fonts, colors, titles, call to actions, whatever that may be on your podcast art will make your artwork look really sloppy and not presentable. And once again, not easy to read. You also want to use other cover art as your inspiration, but don't copy it. So it's always good to look elsewhere for inspiration. I always do it. It helps me get my creative juices flowing, but you want to make sure that you're not copying someone else's artwork completely because that isn't a good look. And you want it to be unique to you, not a carbon copy of someone else's podcast cover art. So yeah, those are my top 5 elements that your cover art needs. To recap, be the correct size, 3,000 by 3,000 pixels. Make sure your podcast name is easy to read, legible, and also just throwing it in there, clear over clever. So when you're picking your podcast name, although this isn't about selecting your podcast name, you want to make sure that your name is clear and easy to read. Clever is fun, but it's not searchable. So just an FYI there. You want to have your name on it somewhere because brand recognition is super crucial. You want to keep it simple, not having too many fonts and colors and all kinds of stuff. Make sure it's easy to read, simple, but still looks good. And then lastly, you can use other people's cover as your inspiration, but don't totally copy it. No one likes that. So don't do that. So yeah, that is it for today's quick episode. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to shoot me a DM on Instagram. I'd love to hear from you guys. I know there's so many of you guys out there that just passively listen every week, and I so appreciate you, but I'd love to hear from you too. So you can shoot me a DM at Jenny Sunnison on Instagram. So that's JennySunneson. I'd love to hear from you. But yeah, shoot me a DM. And if you want to check out the show notes, go to savvypodcastingforentrepreneurs.com. And I will see you guys in the next episode. Bye. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast player like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Stitcher, and leave a review.
You can find us at savvypodcastingforentrepreneurs.com and on Facebook at Savvy Podcasting for Entrepreneurs and Instagram at Savvy Podcasting. Make sure to join our free Facebook community for podcasters by going to savvypodcastingforentrepreneurs.com/community and join in on the exclusive community just for Savvy Podcasting for Entrepreneurs listeners. I'll see you there.